Vav, I think, right? 86.
Yeah, Bava.
Good. And so we, since last week, I only see you guys infrequently, started a new parak of HaChovel, which someone would have thought you could start with the Masechta with, right? Of course, this is talking about human damage. And all the five, as we memorized many times, Tsar, Shevet, Nezek, Tsar, Shevet, Ripoy, and Boshet. And we are up to the Mishnah, which is talking about all of them. But the one we're going to get to today, we'll get to Boshet today, actually. I'm on the wrong daf, I think. I'm on the right daf. Okay. We'll get to Boshet today, but we are not quite up to that. We are at the bottom of Daf Pei Hey Amud Bet, 4 lines from the bottom. And Rabba asked an interesting question. So the discussion we had yesterday, which is a very complicated discussion, I'm jumping into the middle of it, is that when someone damages another person, they have to pay 5 things, right? So one of them is nezek, which means damage, whatever that means. And one of them is shevet, which means time. Shevet means, like Shabbos, right? Time resting that you're not able to work. And so the question is, what is the difference between those two things? What is the difference between paying nezek, a person's damage, and a time a person can't work? So we discussed a little bit yesterday, maybe even the day before, but yesterday for sure, that the difference is that even if a person is damaged, doesn't mean they can't do anything, right? So if let's say you harm somebody and they're I don't know, a baseball pitcher, and you damage their right hand, let's say they're a righty, right? So they no longer can be a pitcher. And so, of course, they're going to get a much lower contract the next year. And that's considered to be nezek, right? The difference. But it doesn't mean they can't do anything. They could do many other jobs. And the fact that they're in the hospital now for 2 weeks because they were getting better means they can't do anything. So the shevet is the payment for other jobs that they would have done during those times that they're in the hospital. The question today, 4 lines from the bottom, as Rosa joins us, Boy Rabba, 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Pei Hey Amud Bet.
What if they can do the other job, but just in a same job, but in a reduced manner?
Then it'll be the same thing. Meaning, so the way the Gemara articulates it, which again, this part is very challenging because we don't have an equivalent, is that it's what you could sell the person for. That's why I like the baseball pitcher, because we sell our baseball pitchers, but obviously it's not what the Gemara meant, right? It's a slave. You evaluate, if a person said, I want to buy this slave, he's an able-bodied young man, he's worth a certain price. If he's a wounded young person or an older person or something different, they're a different price. And so basically that's the change in fundamental value of the person. That's the nezek. The shevet is, even if they're not, so they lost value, but they're not valueless, right? So Evid used to be worth $100,000 and now he's worth $10,000. So you got to pay the $90,000. But beyond that, if he's incapacitated, he's in bed for 2 weeks, you got to pay what he would have done in work in those 2 weeks, but not regular work because you already paid for his arm. Work that you can do without an arm, as the Gemara talked about yesterday.
Well, it's interesting you use the baseball pitcher. I don't want to dwell on this, but this year, the most valuable player in the American League, Ohtani, was a double pitcher and a hitter, designated hitter. And he was injured near the end of the year, and he was the leading pitcher and the leading hitter. He was injured. He couldn't pitch, but he continued to bat for the Angels.
It's a perfect example. So anyway, says the Gemara, say a more complicated case. Boy Rabba, 4 lines from the bottom. Shevet hapochatom bidamim. Let's say you have shevet that reduces the value of the person. Now, what does that mean? Mahu. Rashi says what that means is that you basically you have damage that is completely reversible. Okay, so to use our example, like we use Gemara's example often, right? You damage the person's hand, they no longer can do their job of cutting diamonds, but 2 weeks later, they're going to be completely healed. So in reality, now Tosas points out here, right, it's not so clear if Rashi agrees 100%, but Tosas points out that in reality, assuming Rashi agrees with this, if your hand heals completely, right, if you do damage to someone and they're going to get a complete healing, there is no dumbing, right? There's no damage there because it's like ordering a new car, whether you get it tomorrow or get it in 2 weeks, right? It's the same object. The person is able to do the same thing. The only damage, so you don't pay any nezek. You do pay shevet because you can't use it for 2 weeks, right? So you miss out on work. Shevet means the amount of time you missed out. The question here is, what if the value of the person goes down because people don't trust that he's going to get better? right? Meaning if you went to the slave market in this case, and you had two slaves, one who's like excellent grade A diamond cutter, but his hand's in a cast, right? So he's not going to be able to work for 4 months. You doubt whether he'll actually get better in 4 months, and so therefore his value goes down. In reality, he does get better, but during that time, his value has gone down. So do you have to pay that value during that time, right? Not during that time, but at that time. So but you're still paying, of course, the shevet that he can't work. So that was the question. Hey, Chidam, you ask him, what's the case? Kigon, sheikah yado, you hit someone's hand, vitsamcha, and it weakened, right? Samech literally means to like, I don't know, get weak, right? Come in. Visofa lachzor, but it's going to get completely better. It's not a permanent wound, right? You didn't cut off the hand, as the Mishnah talked about. My kivan, do you say, see 3 lines on the bottom? Kivan de sofa lachzor lo yav lev midi. Maybe since it's going to come back complete value, you don't pay any nezek because there was no nezek. You didn't cause any permanent damage to his hand. Again, you will pay tsar, you will pay shevet, you will pay everything else, but you don't pay nezek. Odilma hashta mihat ifchate. Now, at this moment, he's worth less, right? Because people doubt, this is again Tosas shot here, Rashi does not speak it out, that people are going to be unconfident that he's going to get better, and therefore his value has gone down, right? Tashma. So let's try to prove it from a very interesting, unrelated, but we'll see why we talk about this case. Says the Braita, Hamakeh aviv v'imo. Let's say a person hits their mother or father. Now, the Torah says that Makeh aviv v'imo mot yumat, they kill you for that. And remember, you don't pay money, Rosa, remember that? You don't pay money if you are chayiv mitah, but in this case, lo asa behen chabura, you didn't make a wound. And you're only chayiv mitah for hitting your parents if you make a wound, if you make a bruise, right? So you didn't. So you punched them, you hurt them. We'll see the case in a second, but it didn't cause a bruise. So then you're not chayiv mitah, but you are going to have to pay damage, we're going to say. Or if you harm someone on Yom Kippur, remember making a chabura is a melacha on Shabbat. You're chayiv mita, you get killed for it. But on Yom Kippur, we don't kill you; you get karet. So you're not chayiv mita, and this Tana holds that you have to pay money when it's only karet. Says the Gemara on top of daf pei vav amud aleph chayav bikulan. You have to pay all of them. Now we think all of them means nezek, tsar, shevet, ripoy, and boshen, including nezek. Now, what does it mean lo asa b'chabura? Right? How did you injure your parents without making a visible wound? Hechidami, it must be this kind of case. Kigon shikah yado, you hit their hand, v'sofo lachzar, didn't cause any kind of permanent damage. You didn't cut anything off, because that doesn't come back. You didn't even cause a wound. You might have injured the nerves, let's say, so they can't cut their diamonds, let's say. You caused damage, but that's sofo lachzar, and it says you have to pay everything, so it implies that there is nezek, right? V'ketani chayav v'kulan. So we prove from this very interesting and unrelated kind of case that in fact, if you cause damage, that's temporary, you still pay nezek. Amri says, well, it's not really a great proof because this case of the parent might be is that the word? Yeah, shechir sho. Sorry, I added a hey there. Shechir sho, that you actually made them deaf. You caused them damage. You played your music too loud, and you caused them to go deaf, and you didn't make any chabura. You didn't cause any wound, right? It's internal, and there you wouldn't be chayiv mita because you didn't cause a visible wound, but you caused damage. And as the Mishnah said, causing someone to go deaf is the worst thing you can do, right? It's permanent almost. They have no value at all for society, and so you have to pay everything. Ask the Gemara, but that's not the case. So I'm a Rabbah. 5 lines from the top. Neharag. No. If you cause your parents to go deaf, you get killed for that. Why? Right? Even though you can't, it's impossible for them to go deaf without there being some wound. Now, chabura in the Gemara always means you drew blood, right? You caused her to bleed. Now, you don't see the blood because it's internal. But says the Gemara, tipta dedama nafale b'udinei. A drop of blood fell into the air. Ear. EAR, right? So there's a drop of blood that must have fallen, meaning you can't see it from the outside. There's no visible bleeding or wound, but clearly if he went deaf, something happened on the inside, and says Rabbah, you'd be chayiv, you'd kill that person. Now, of course, if you kill him, you don't pay any damages, right? Ella, you know what the case must be? Where the child harmed their parent by cutting off their hair. And cutting off the hair doesn't cause a chabura. It could be painful. It has to be painful here because there's nezek, tsar, shevet, all that. And it might cause, some irritation of the scalp, but it's not considered to be something that would change the fundamental value of that person. Says Gemara, well, so what? Gilcho mahader hader. It's the same thing. Why would you pay nezek for cutting off the hair, even though sure he's less valuable at this point without the hair? Let's say he's an actor, I don't know, and the hair matters, right? So, but it's that the hair is going to come back, so it's the same thing. Lahainu bayan. That was our question. So if you're proving from here that if you cut off your parents' hair, you're chayiv nezek, that proves that if something comes back, you have to pay nezek. And so Gemara Amri says the Gemara, it's not really a proof. You know what the case must be here? You actually put some nasha, I don't know how they translate nasha, but some kind of dye. It's not dye, it's like lyre is how we often translate it.
No, it's a cream that makes the hair go, like a depilatory cream.
Right. So it's a depilatory, so it causes hair to fall out permanently. The lo hadar. It's some kind of magic, I don't know, alligator cream that the hair will never grow back in that spot again. And there it's permanent. So it's not like harming a hand or cutting off the hair, which comes back. Here, the itlay, and why is there tsar? So why is there pain? The itlay kartufne beresha, there's like cracks in the hair. Actually, I think has a French word here, but anyways, kartufne means like, cracks in the hair. Where's the Rashi? No, not here, I guess. Because Amy just says, that's Hebrew. There's cracks, there's like indentations in the head that it burns, of course. And vitzavchi mehanu kartufi, and he cries out, meaning it's painful from these cracks. Ripoy, you need to get a doctor to bias you, right? You definitely need to get some kind of creams that will help heal the skin so it doesn't get burned. And shevet, the havi marki bekuvin. Why do you pay shevet? You have to pay shevet because he was a dancer, right? Merakeh bekubi. He was a dancer, and Rashi goes through a beautiful explanation here or the Gemara actually goes through it, that you would sell, you'd work in the stores, and by using his or her hair, he would be able to attract people to buy the objects. So the hair was very critical for the job, right? You have to show people, come buy it with your hair, with your head, and right? And you can't show it because you've got now these cracks and you've got the hideous, disgusting wounds in your head. And so it totally ruined your profession, right? You got to put on a hat. And now you can't work. And Boshed, of course, this is a very embarrassing thing. And so therefore, this case of the parent, there's no chabura, because there's no blood drawn, but it is permanent damage. And you have to pay all the things because of that. Okay, so that's the case. So we don't have a resolution of the question we started with today of Rabbah, which is if you damage someone and they temporarily go down in value because of uncertainty about their potential healing, but it's going to heal completely. There's no permanent damage. You definitely pay shevet, which is the work they can't do while they're wounded. But do you pay difference in value at this point if they had been up for sale at this point? So that's a question that Rabbah had. Says the Gemara, Milta, around 15 lines down, Milta deboile the Rabbah, a thing, Milta means words, right? But this question that was uncertain to Rabbah, Pshita leila Abaya, Abaya had no questions. Abaya knew exactly the answer. Abaya had no doubt, lahach gisa, in one direction. And Rava also had no doubt in a different direction, lahach gisa. So each one was very confident of the answer, but they had conflicting answers. So Rabbah didn't know the answer. Abaya was confident, and Rava was confident, but of different solutions. And what was that? How do we know that? To Itmar. He called al yado, says it's not a bright, it's a statement of Amoraim. You hit a person on their hand, samta, and it weakens the hand. V'sofo lachzor, and it's going to get better, but it's going to take a month. And so for the next month, this person is not worth as much. Had he been broke and had to go sell himself, he would have gotten less value, right? Abaya says, Notain lo shevet gidola v'shevet ktana. You have to pay shevet, which means payment for not being able to work, called shevet gidola, big picture shevet, and small picture shevet. And that is, big picture shevet is what we call nezek, right? What's, as an entity, as a picture, how much is he worth? That's shevet gidola. He's got a broken hand. There's doubt about whether it will recover. People are going to pay much less for him on the market. That's nezek. The second thing, shevet kitana, is that even if your hand's broken, right, normally you can do other jobs. You can, I don't know, you can watch the cucumbers, as we always say, right? Shomer kishuim. You just need your feet for that and your eyes, right? And so you also have to pay if he's going to be in the hospital for a month and he can't do any job. You have to pay shevet kitana. So Abai is clear. You got to pay because today he's not worth the same. And Rava says, I disagree. You only pay the daily damage, not the big picture damage, right? Big picture, there is no damage. He's going to recover completely. So even if you had to sell him, he'd be worth less. There is no intrinsic damage, and you just pay the damage of every day that he can't go to work. Now, that's the machloket Abai and Rava, and Rava was not so sure. Now, Itmar. What about, we're adding levels of complexity here, of course, because it's Daf Yomi, we never cover all the complexity. But says the Gemara, a very interesting question. What if you are damaging Itmar, kotea yad eved ivri shel chavero? What if you damage an eved ivri, not an eved Kanani, which is a whole separate discussion, right? But you damage a Jewish person who's an eved, who was sold himself, right? Person had debts. He sold himself as a slave to another Jew for till Shemitah, right? And then you damage him. So now the owner no longer has the services of his eved. The eved's a person too. He no longer has the services of his hand. So how do you view that? Abaya says, notein lo shevet gedolah le'eved. You give the shevet gedolah, which again is another way of saying nezek, to the slave, right? Because previously he was a regular person. He was worth, I don't know, $1,000. Now he's missing a hand. He's worth $500. So you pay that to him. And shevet ketana the Rav. You give shevet ketana what he can't do during the days that he's injured. That goes to his owner. Because his owner basically has the rights, not of him. He doesn't own him. It's not an Eved Kanani. He owns his rights to work. So whatever work he can do, you pay the owner. Whatever intrinsic value he's lost, you pay to him. Rava says, no. Because look, the owner bought a slave who had a hand, right? So he didn't buy a slave who can only watch cucumbers. He bought a slave that's going to, drive the truck for him. I don't know. So Rava says, no. In fact, you look at it differently. You give all the money to the Eved, to the person who owns himself, and the Eved then has to take all that money, v'likach mehem karka, he has to buy some property that produces fruit, v'harav ochel perot. The Rav eats the perot, because basically the Rav doesn't own the person, he owns everything the person can make during the time that he's a slave. So you don't give the Eved the principal and let the Rav, not use anything. The Eved has to use all the money he gets to invest. The Rav gets any perot while he's an Eved, right? Once he's free at the end of Shemitah, he gets it all himself. And so therefore, that's how you view it. And you have to give the Rav value the whole time.
That's kind of like in marriage where the woman brings, okay.
I was trying to avoid saying it, but you're correct.
Okay,
so it 100% correct. It's exactly the same. During the term of the marriage, the principal belongs to her, Nichsei Tzom Barzel, as we call them, right? And or Nichsei, whatever, is different cases, but he gets all the benefits. Correct, exactly. Pshita, now it's
You would only say that the master, he owns the Eved, not just his body, but he owns he can buy and sell that Eved. We would throughout Shas, we're saying that he owns the Eved.
So so just to clarify, that's why I said this is an Eved Ivri. This is a Jewish Eved. So it's true by an Eved Kanani, what you said is accurate. By a Jewish Eved, that's not the case. You definitely don't own a Jewish Eved. Meaning he remains chayiv in mitzvot. He's Jewish, like he's an individual for all regards. There are exceptions. He does have to serve his master at the expense of himself for many things. We discussed Avadim already in Kiddushin, but he owns himself. So unlike again, this would not be true about an Eved Kanani, but this is the halacha by an Eved Ivri, by a Jewish slave. Now, Pshita, says the Gemara, it's obvious to us that let's say the Eved was injured in a way that diminished his value for himself, but not his utility to his owner. We'll see what that case is. Pichet etzel atzmo, he's worth less for himself. Etzel rabo lo pichet. But for his owner, he's not worth less. Hechidami, what's the case of that? The paske the reish unya, you cut off the top of his earlobe, right? So obviously, whatever job he did for his owner, he can still do. But one day when he's free and he goes back out and he wants to, I don't know, either be in the movies or find a spouse or I don't know, do something, he's going to be worth less because of that injury, right? Oh, the reish nechire, or the top of his tip of his what's it called? His nostrils, right? Cut off his nose. right? So that's very disfiguring. It's very much reduces his value in other ways in life, but not to his master. He's still a slave. So then, hakol latzmo. So then everything you pay for him because it had no impact on his owner. But if it's pichet etzel rabo, if it also caused damage that would reduce his value to his owner, such as you cut off his hand, then plukta the Rabbi of a Rava, that's Rabbi and Rava disagreed about whether he gets the nezek and the owner gets the shevet, or he gets everything, he's got to buy land and give the owner the peyrot. Okay, we're at the 2 dots halfway down. We're finally up to the 5th thing, which is boshat, embarrassment, which the Mishnah said, hakol lefi hamivvayesh v'hamitbayesh. It's context dependent, right? If a person embarrasses another person, the embarrassment level depends on how respected or respectable the person being embarrassed is, and the stature of the person causing the embarrassment, right? If a 5th grader calls you, I don't know, a bad word, you don't feel so bad unless you're in 5th grade, right? And so that's how the context really matters. Says the Gemara, money matnitin, our Mishnah does not seem to be going according to any of the Tanaim we know. Lo Rabbi Meir, lo Rabbi Yehuda, Ella, maybe it's Rabbi Shimoni. Ditanya, I should say Ditanya, not Titsnan. We're going to have a Mishnah later, a very famous Mishnah on Daf Tzadi Amud Bet, which this is based on, which talks about this question of relative value, right? In the Gemara, the Mishnah, we'll get there soon. Don't hold your horses, but we get to the Mishnah, and Rabbi Akiva has a very famous saying in the Mishnah, which is what this bright is based on, which is that even if because the Mishnah talks about if the person is very valuable or not valuable, if you cut off their hair, depends on how nice their hair is, this kind of stuff. And Rabbi Akiva says it doesn't matter. Aniyim shebi Yisrael, I'm reading the Mishnah from Daf Tzadi Amud Bet. Afilo aniyim shebi Yisrael, even the poorest, lowest, homeless people in Bnei Yisrael, ro'in otam kilohem bnei chorim shi'ardu minichseihem. You view them as being the equivalent of rich people who just ran out of money. Shehein bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. Right? They are all children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And so you treat everybody the same. Although, sure, you could say this person's of low stature, you give them the same amount as a rich person. That's Rabbi Akiva's statement. All his students, remember these are all students of Rabbi Akiva, commented on this and had different versions. So says the Braita, now we're going to quote, V'kulan, all the people, meaning even very poor people, you view them as if they're poor people, okay, which is essentially what Rabbi Akiva said. You treat everybody the same. Rabbi Yehuda says, no. No. If you're a great person, then obviously the busha is one level. If you're a smaller stature person, that's what katan means here, you're a different stature, different value. Rabbi Shimon says, well, it really depends on the category. Because as shirim, even if you're rich, you view them as if they are people who just ran out of money. But aniyim, you view them kipechutim shebahem. You view them as being among the poorest among them, and which is really very similar. We'll see why it's different later, but it's very similar to what Rabbi Yehuda seemed to say. Right now, money matznitin. Who is our Mishnah? Right, Rabbi Meir matznitin katanya kol lefiyam mevayeshu mitbayesh. Right, if it's Rabbi Meir, it doesn't make any sense because our Mishnah said it's all context depending on the person who embarrassed and the person who was embarrassed. And Rabbi Meir kulu b'hadei adadin. Rabbi Meir says everyone gets treated the same. You embarrass a person, you don't base it on their current stature. You base it on their overall stature, their being a Jew. Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda does seem to be like our Mishnah because our Mishnah said that it's based on the one who embarrasses, the one who's embarrassed. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. If you're great, it's based on your greatness. If you're a katan, lefi katnuto. But there's a different part of our Mishnah that doesn't make sense according to Rabbi Yehuda. Because matnit and katani, our Mishnah said, hamevayeshet suma. Remember, if you embarrass a blind person, right? Our Mishnah said you're chayav, right? You have to pay. Now, Rabbi Yehuda does not agree with that. Either Rabbi Yehuda Omer, suma in lo boshet. Rabbi Yehuda says that a suma does not fall into the category of boshet. That in fact, and we'll see why, we're going to get this later today's Gemara, that a blind person is not part. Now, really, Rabbi Yehuda was talking about is that a blind person who hurts somebody else, embarrasses somebody else, doesn't have to pay for boshet. But we think it means both ways. So our Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yehuda, elav Rabbi Shimoni. Our Mishnah must be Rabbi Shimon. Says the Gemara 2 lines from the last of the narrow lines. I feel Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah could be Rabbi Yehuda. He amar Rabbi Yehuda suma in la boshet. When Rabbi Yehuda said that the concept of embarrassment does not apply to a blind person, that's the mishkamine, to collect from a blind person who embarrasses another person. Aval mitzvale, to give money to a blind person who you embarrassed, yavinale, you do have to pay them. Says the Gemara, that can't be the case. Because Midiktani Seifa, the end of our Mishnah said, Hamevayeshet yashan. Remember, if you embarrass a person who's asleep, they don't know you embarrassed them. Said our Mishnah chayav, it doesn't matter, you still have to pay. And then the Mishnah finished off by saying, and if a person is asleep and they embarrass somebody else, right, you knock over a cup of, I don't know, tea in your sleep and you falls on somebody else's beautiful new shirt. That's not embarrassment, but let's say they are then embarrassed because of it. The yashan shabiyesh patur. A person who embarrasses a sleeping person has to pay, but a sleeping person who embarrasses is patur. That implies, doesn't say, that same equivalence by a summa, that a blind person who embarrasses someone, you don't have to pay, but if you embarrass a blind person, you do pay. It must be that for a blind person, you're chayav both ways, right? V'lo tani summa shebiyesh patur michlal lo shnahachi v'lo shnahachi. That doesn't matter whether the blind person caused the embarrassment or was embarrassed. The Mishnah says you're chayav, and Rabbi Yehuda says you're patur. Our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Yehuda; it must be Rabbi Shimon. Now, continues the Gemara, third of the wide lines. What about the following Braita, which also talks about levels of embarrassment? Says the Braita, let's say you intended to embarrass a kid. Now, we don't think katan means a kid now. We think it means a person of low stature, right? So you're at the swimming pool and you walk, this is just the Gemara's case, I'm just using it, and you walk over and you pull down someone's swimming bathing suit. And you think it's some unimportant person. And in fact, it's the most important person there. You embarrass a very prominent person, which is, of course, something you'd have to pay more money for, presumably. Says the Braita, notein ligadol, you have to pay the person you embarrassed, demei boshto shel katan. You only pay the embarrassment that a person you thought it was, you'd have to pay. So it might be a $20 embarrassment, not a $100 embarrassment. Because remember, embarrassment all has to do not with what happened, but with what your intent was, right? What you thought was going to happen. Now, let's say, continues the Braita, you plan to vayeshet to evet. You plan to embarrass, to pull down the bathing suit of and I'm using that because that's the Mishnah's case, just for example, right? Just to be clear, you cause someone to be naked. That's the Mishnah's case. So you're intending the vayeshet to evet. You want to embarrass a slave. Ubiyeshet ben chorin, by mistake. You didn't realize who it was from the back. You did it for a ben chorin. Then noten the ben chorin to meibo shto shel evet. Then you pay the ben chorin the amount of embarrassment pay that you would have paid for embarrassing an evet. Now, money. Who's the Tana of this Braita? Is it lo Rabbi Meir? Can't be Rabbi Meir, who says that you pay everyone the same. So whether you're a katan or gadol, there's no demei katan or gadol. And lo Rabbi Yehuda, we'll see why. Lo Rabbi Shimon. Now we think it means katan b'nechasim. A katan means a poor person, and gadol means great money, right? Gadol b'nechasim, high net worth or low net worth. And Rabbi Meir, Hamer Kulu Badi Adadinin. Rabbi Meir said you pay everyone the same. You embarrass a Jew, you pay the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda, Hamer In Lavadin Boshen. We're going to see later, Yehuda says you don't pay anything if it's an evet. So what do you mean you pay the ben chorin what you would have paid the evet? You would have paid the evet nothing. Rabbi Shimon says another opinion, which is Hamar, Nitkavein levayeshet zeh. If you intend to embarrass person A, and you are biyesh et zeh, and you instead embarrass someone, person B, then you're patur completely. It's not, you pay what you intended to do, right? You intended to embarrass a poor person, you embarrassed a rich person. You don't pay the poor person to the rich person like the Braita said. You pay nothing because it all depends on intention, like maybe Shabbos or Richtzicha or something like that, right? My time is kiktala. It's like killing a person. Maktala adam mitkaven lay. If you intend to kill one person and the axe goes, you like let's say me, right? You shoot an arrow to kill one person. You have no aim, and it goes and kills somebody else. You're patur. Now you're of course chayiv midrabanan. You're chayiv for shogeg, right? But you're patur because dichtiv varav lo become a love. You have to be laying in wait for a person and attack the same person. Ad shinitkavein lo. So the same thing is true about Boshet. Boshet nami ad mitkavein lay dichtiv v'sholcha yada v'chsika b'mivushav. Right, it says in the famous case of Boshet, where the woman went and attacked and touched and grabbed the testicles of the man fighting her husband, that she sent her hand and she grabbed it. What do you mean? How else are you going to grab something unless you send your hand? It's to tell you the same thing as by kitala. Achi itkavein lo, you have to have intention. So it can't be anybody. It can't be Rabbi Yehuda. It can't be Rabbi Meir. It can't be Rabbi Shimon. The Olam says the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Yehuda. V'chikam Rabbi Yehuda in lavadim boshet. When Rabbi Yehuda said slaves don't have boshet, that was not, it's true that you don't have to pay a slave boshet, but a slave has to be, I'm sorry, lemitvalahu, right? They don't have to pay. You do assess the value in a slave. Or else you could say, I feel Rabbi Meir. It could be it's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds, what do you mean there's no katan and gadol? Rabbi Meir holds everybody's equal. That's true that everybody's equal if they are people. But katan here means a minor, right? Not a minor wealth person, a minor person, right? And misavrik gadol b'nechasim katan b'nechasim. You're not correct that it means a lot of money or a little bit of money. It means gadol mamash, katan mamash. Right? So you thought that you were causing damage or causing embarrassment to a kid, right? And instead you caused damage, embarrassment to an adult. And that's where the Braita says, oh, of course you have to pay, but you only have to pay the damage that it would have been to embarrass a kid. Ask the Gemara the famous question that we're going to have 3 times today. The last line. Katan bar boshet who? I don't get it. What kind of embarrassment can the kid have? Kids have no inhibitions. Right? They're children. They don't have any sense that there's anything wrong in the world. The kid walks around, again, obviously, boshet is incredibly context dependent, right? But in certain societies where kids are immature, they're not reached, sexual maturity, they walk around naked, they have no sense of personal space. And so what kind of embarrassment is there? And again, embarrassment in the classic case is causing someone to be exposed, right? So what kind of boshet would there be for a kid? Says the Gemara, it's not case. A kid, in fact, could be embarrassed. Kedamar of Papa, the michlam alei vu michlam. If you're talking about a case, we'll see his case later today, where you embarrass them and they get red in the face. They're embarrassed. Hachanami the michlam alei vu michlam. It just means embarrass him and they get embarrassed. And so it is dependent on the context. But if it's a kid, either in a society where they protect privacy, like our society, or an 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever year old kid, and they're embarrassed, then you have to pay boshet in theory, right? Now you only pay it if you end up doing it to a gadol. We turn the page to Daf Pei Vav Amud Bet. Says the Mishnah now. We are going to continue. This is a lot of repetition now. Hopefully we'll go quickly. I know we're a little late. Hamevayeshet ha'aron. Let's say a person is already naked and you embarrass them by furthering their nakedness. Okay? Let's say either you call attention to it or they're partially uncovered and you uncover them more. Says the Mishnah, or a mevayeshet asuma, or you uncover a person who's blind, which is the case we just had, or mevayeshet yashan, or you mevayesh someone who's fast asleep, so you uncover them, but they don't know about it. Chayav, you got to pay in all those cases. But if you're yashan shabiyesh, if you're asleep and you cause embarrassment, then you're patur. Okay, we unpack some of this on Amud Aleph. We're going to keep discussing it. Continues the Mishnah. Let's say you're nafal min hagad. You roll off the roof, very classic case we've had, and you fall on somebody and you drag off their clothing. Vihizik, you damage, ubiesh, and you embarrass them. Chayav al nezek, you have to pay the damage and the shevet and sar. Patur al boshet, but you're patur on boshet ad sheyehe mitkavein, until you intend to cause them embarrassment. So a boshet has to be intentional. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we have a Braita. It says, Bisho arom chayav. If you embarrass a person who is unclothed, you're chayav. Now, Tosfos understands, unlike what I just said to you, so I'm going to take it back because I don't want to disagree with Tosfos, that when the Mishnah said, Hamevayeshet arom, Rashi doesn't agree with Tosfos, but I'm going to tell you what Tosfos says. Hamevayeshet arom meant, I said in the Mishnah meant you further cause nakedness in someone who's naked. Tosfos says it doesn't mean that. It means, doesn't have to mean that. It can mean you smack someone in the face, right? Or put a pie in their face and they're walking around naked. So you increase their humiliation index, right? They're already walking around without clothes, and you did something else. You spit in their face is the classic case that Tosfos brings. So there we understand you added embarrassment to their embarrassment. The case in the Gemara, which is not so clear why Tosfos, well, it's clear, but anyways, the brightest case is where you did what I said in the Mishnah. The person was partially unclothed and you further unclothed them. So you're bisho arom, you're chayav. And says the Braita, says the Gemara now, fifth line, sixth line, Eino doma baisho aram the baisho lavush. The amount of damage you pay is not the same, right? Because obviously this person started off in a compromised situation. So you furthered it, but that's not the same as a fully clothed person who you embarrassed. Now, continues the Braita, baisho bebeit hamerchatz. Let's say you embarrass somebody by calling attention to their nakedness or furthering their nakedness in the sauna, right? Where everyone's walking around naked. So what's the big deal? Then you're still chayav because you either called attention to it or furthered it. But it's not the same as if he's wearing clothes, if it's in the subway station. Obviously, it's not the same if you embarrass them in the merchatz to doing it in the shuk. Says the Gemara now, Amar Mar, Baisho arum chayav. If you embarrass a person who's naked, you're chayav. Now, this is Tosas' proof. Says the Gemara, Arom bar bosha too? I don't get it. How could you embarrass somebody who's already naked? They're already naked. The Tosas says, what do you mean? Well, you smacked them in the face, right? And why didn't we ask this question on the Mishnah? The Tosas' point is that the Mishnah is not a question because the Mishnah, the busha could be something else. But in the Braita, it's specifically talking about nudity, and that's the case of the Beit HaMerchatz. And if he's already naked or partially naked and you make it worse, why would you have to pay? It doesn't make any sense. Why? Because he already is embarrassed, or she, from what's done. Why are you furthering that? And why are you chayiv? Amar of Papa, you know what it means? My arom, you know what a case means of naked here? The atazika karchinu the ma'aneh. What happened was a wind came and blew off his shirt, or blew off her shirt, right? The atahu delinu tfei. You yanked it off a little bit more. So the person was naked by nature, but that's not the key thing. The key thing here, Tosa says, is that they were partially nude. And it furthered it, right? The pants were falling down, and you pulled them down even more. And baisho, where am I? Karchinu lemane vatu dolinu tfei ubaisho, and you embarrass the person further. And the case of baisho bebeit hamerchatz chayav, says the Gemara, how could you be embarrassed in beit hamerchatz? Every person in beit hamerchatz walks around naked. Beit hamerchatz bar bosha too. Amar papa baisho agav hanahar. It wasn't a beit hamerchatz that we think of where people usually walk around without clothes. It was, like the swimming pool. It was the side of the river, where I guess many people walk around without clothes, or some people go into the water without clothes before bathing suits, but you make an attempt outside of the water to cover yourself up and you embarrass this person. So that's where we said, because you furthered their embarrassment, you have to pay. Boy, Rabbi Bar Mamo. Ask Rabbi Bar Mamo, let's say, very, very key question. We had this before. By show yashan, you embarrass, let's say you expose a person who's asleep. Right? You take off their clothing, everyone sees them naked, it's very embarrassing. Umate. But the guy dies before they wake up. So they never knew or never were alive, let's say, or awake when they were embarrassed by you. So do you have to pay the errors or not? Mahu. So, right, you got the case? You embarrassed the person who's asleep and they died before they woke up. So Mahu. Says one second. What's the question? My kami boiling. What exactly are you asking? Says Rav Zvid, and we'll see why we asked that question. Says Rav Zvid, this is the question. Hachi kami boiling. The question that this statement of Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo is it mishum kisufahu? Do you pay for bosha because kisufa, which means you embarrassed the person, and this person was never embarrassed because they were unconscious and then dead, right? V'ha mitle. This guy died, v'letle kisufa. There's no embarrassment. The person was never awake or aware that you embarrassed them. Otilma mishum zilutahu. Or do you pay because you cheapened the person, right? That's what zil means, cheaper. You did, I don't know how another translation, but you made them humiliated, right? What does he say? What, Miriam, what were you adding? No? You're muted.
Degradation.
Okay, so the same, right? Exactly. So you made the person, other people think less of this person, and of course that's the case. I mean, it's humiliating even more so. A person on their deathbed, right? I mean, unfortunately, this happens, right? A person gets, we'll see the case in a second, get into a car crash, right? And the victim is lying on the ground in a humiliating position. You take a picture of that. So is it mishum ziluta v'haz isla, and you cheapen the person? So Tashma, let's try to prove it from the following Mishnah. Right.
Is the Gemara going to ask the opposite case where the person who did the embarrassment, removing this guy, he died?
So no, because remember, we said in the Mishnah that if a person's asleep and they embarrass someone, they're putter. They can stay alive. You don't remember, embarrassment requires intention. If you're asleep and you
No, that's not what I'm asking. The person embarrassed a sleeping person, and the person who removed the sheet from a sleeping person, he himself died.
Oh, that's a good question. We're not going to ask it here. It's a good, I mean, it's a good question whether you can be omeid and make someone pay if they are already dead. You probably can't, but no, we're not going to ask it
What
today.
his heirs have to pay for him and for
So that's a really good question. So actually we're going to discuss some of that, not today, I don't think, but about whether all these damages are nezek or knas, right? Because you wouldn't pay knas after death, but you would pay sort of monetary damages. So yes, we'll get into heirs in a second. But says the Gemara Tashma with the second to last narrow line. Rabbi Meir says, Cheresh v'katan, a person who's deaf and a person who's a minor, yesh lahem boshet. They fall into the category of boshet. You can embarrass them. Shota in the boshet, but a person who is how do we turn the shota? Not of sound mind, we're going to call it, does not have boshet. Now, why? It says more. If the reason you pay boshet is because you cheapened a person, then I get it. A katan, hainu diktani katan, has boshet because it's made the person a laughing stock, right? They're less valuable. Or less, not valuable, but less valued. Eliyam mishum kisufa, right? If you say it's because the person felt embarrassed, bar katan bar boshet too. I don't get it. A child doesn't feel embarrassed by being humiliated. Ella mai says, well, okay, so then it must be it's mishum ziluta. So you're saying you're right. That the reason you pay boshet is because you cheapen the person, and that's why you pay for a katan. So then why won't you pay for a shota? Feel a shota nami, right? If you made fun or exposed the person as a shota, that cheapens them. Says, well, no. Amri shota in the chabosha kedola mizu. Gemara says a person who's a shota, again, it must mean something very, very specific. That is considered to be the height of boshet. A shota naked is not different than a regular shota. Says, well, okay, so mikol makom, third wide line, nifshat mina, you can prove from Rabbi Meir that mishum zilutu, that it must be the reason you're paying is because you cheapened the person, because imishum kisufa, if it was because of embarrassing the person, a minor would never be embarrassed. Katan bar kisufa. Says, well, no, it's not a good proof because Kedamar of Papa, as Rav Papa is going to say later, it's his second time saying it today, but not his primary time. The michlam umichlam. It's talking about a case where you embarrass the kid and they get embarrassed. And so they are capable of embarrassment. Achnami, the michlam umichlam. So that is the answer of Rev Svi. Rav Papa says that was not Rav Abba bar Mama's question. Rav Abba bar Mama's question had nothing to do with whether you pay boshet because you embarrass them or because you cheapen them. The question was, Hachi, says Rav Papa, where am I? Hacha kami boile. The question of Rav Abba bar Mama was, Mishum kisufa didei, who? Do you pay boshet because you embarrass that individual and he's not embarrassed because he's dead? V'hamayit odilma mishum boshet mishpacha. Or is it reputation that extends beyond your life because your family thinks of you a certain way, people think of you a certain way, and so even though you're not alive, right, you don't want to embarrass the dead, right? And obviously the dead doesn't care, but embarrasses their family and their associates and their legacy, right? And therefore, of course, if you embarrass a person who's in the accident about to die, then you certainly should pay boshet. So Tashma, let's try to prove from the Braita again. It says Cheresh v'katan yesh lem boshet. But shota ain't la boshet, right? Same one we quoted before. A minor and a we don't quote Rabbi Meir here for some reason, but a cheresh and a katan you have boshet, a shota ain't la boshet. Now, iyam Rabbi Shlomo mishum boshet mishpacha. If it's because of family reputation, so I get it. You embarrass a kid, you're embarrassing their family. Hainu tani katan, you have to pay. Eliyam mishum kisufa didei. If it's because of personal embarrassment, a child doesn't get embarrassed. Katan bar boshet, who? Question mark. Ella says, well, you're right. It must be mishum boshet b'nei mishpacha. So then what if the person is a shoteh? Even though you can't embarrass that person, you're embarrassing their family, right? I feel a shoteh nami. There's where no, we don't say that. A shoteh ein lecha boshet kedula mizu. It's not more embarrassing. The person already is a shoteh. Says we're okay. Mikol makom nifshat. I know. I agree. Mikol makom nifshat mina. Let's prove from this bright to the mishum boshet mishpacha. It must be that you're paying because of familial reputation, and therefore you pay even for a person who died. The mishum kisufa, because if it was just because of personal embarrassment, katan bar kisufa who? Question mark. And this is where Rav Papa finally says that we've quoted twice already. Rav Papa, no way. Of course you can embarrass a kid. The michlamu michlam. That you can embarrass them and they get embarrassed. Hatanya, and in fact, we have a bright that this Hatanya is supportive, not questioning. It's as we say, binichuta. Rabbi Omer Cher Sheish Lo Boshet, Shota Ein Lo Boshet. A cheresh, you can embarrass, meaning there's embarrassment you have to pay. A shota, no embarrassment. A katan, it depends. Pamim yesh lo boshet, pamim ein lo. Pamim yesh lo, pamim ein lo. Had de michlam maleo michlam, had de michlam mulei velo michlam. It really depends on the context, on what happens. Okay, we are 10 lines on the bottom. We're going to do this quickly because we've already discussed it today. Hamivayeshet asumar. Mishnah said if you embarrass a person who's blind, you have to pay. You're chayav, right? It says the Gemara Matitin Delok Rabbi Yehuda, as we said on Amud Aleph, this goes against Rabbi Yehuda. The time Rabbi Yehuda Omer Summa ein lo boshet. And a person who is a summa does not pay boshet if they embarrass somebody else. V'kach hayu Rabbi Yehuda potro michayvei goliot. If you just said a blind person who kills a person by mistake does not have to go to galut, and he doesn't get malkut, mitot betin. So if you're blind, you can get away with a lot, right? My taima, why is that? Rabbi Yehuda, Gamar einecha meidim zomimim. You learn exerashav the word einecha from eidim zomimim. Remember, a blind person cannot be an aid. That's a fact. You can't testify you saw something if you're blind, right? So you can't be eidim zomimim. Ma hatam sumin lo. That we all agree on. A blind person cannot testify. Avhacha by boshet suma lo. And he's also pater michayvei goliot. Titania, it says by galut that if you kill a person below ra'ut, you didn't see them and you killed them by mistake. But if you can't see, you can't be included in that group. Prat l'suma, that excludes a blind person, to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says, no, we include a suma from that pasuk. The Rabbot did the suma. What? My time to Rabbi Yehuda. Amar lecha, because the pasuk says, 6 lines from the bottom, Vasher yavo re'eu bayar, you come across your friend in the forest, him to chop wood, and that would include everybody, afilu suma. Then katav rachmana, but you didn't see them below ra'ut. That's lamute suma, right? It excludes them because they can't see. And Remeir says, you're right, it excludes a suma. But the next pasuk says, Katuv Rachmana below ra'ut, which is lamute. But Katav Rachmana bivli dat. You didn't know what you were doing. Now, suma, of course, didn't know what they were doing because they couldn't see. And that also excludes a blind person, lamute. And we have the famous principle of having mi'ut achar mi'ut. It's saying, don't not exclude that person, a second time exclude that person. That means you include that person, right? Ve'ein mi'ut achar mi'ut el l'rabot. Whenever the Torah says, exclude a person, and the second time says to exclude the person, it's there to tell you, don't exclude that person. And the same is true in the opposite. Ein riboy achar riboy el l'ma'it. And Rabbi Yehuda, so why does it say bavlidat? That's probably mitkavein hudata. That it means if you intended to kill one person and killed another, you're patur. I'm going to read one more line. Chayve mitot beitin, because Atya, it's 2 more lines. Atya rotzeach. He makes a derashav from the word rotzeach at edim zomimim to mita, and michayve goliot. Sorry, not from edim zomimim, from chayve goliot, and chayve malkut will also be patur. Atya rasha michayve mitot beitin. So we'll stop there. We'll go into this actually more tomorrow about what blind people have to pay. And remember, it's a very famous Gemara because Rabbi Yochanan, if you recall, was blind, right? And Rabbi Yochanan had something. Sorry, not Rabbi Yosef was blind. Not Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yosef.
But how does now in the Bereshit, the beginning of the Torah, there's Lemech, and he was blind, and he killed someone by a chabura. I think it was Lemech. So, and he was exiled, and the whole story. How does this jive with the Gemara here?
That's a very good question. It's a very esoteric, I would say. I mean, obviously, nothing happened in Bereshit. It's considered to be halachic in this way. But maybe it goes against Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would hold that Lemech, if he was blind, would not have to go into exile for the sin of killing a person, who he killed Cain, right? But we'll see tomorrow. Don't, if you're blind, don't start killing people yet. We're going to start tomorrow's Gemara from this bottom line. We'll talk more about this question, but it is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that people who are blind are specific for are patur for many mitzvot or responsibilities in the Torah. There's obviously a lot of debate in today's daf about what deaf and blind and shoteh mean in a time where we have education systems that, and tools that change all of those things. So obviously it's much more complex than it makes it sound.
Ellie.
Yes, Miriam. We're good? Okay, we have to decide what time tomorrow. Can we do the
Ellie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for still sporting the Columbia gear, but are there biblical cases of mitbayeshet beyond the nakedness in Bereshit?
So yeah, the case that, yes, you missed it, I would say, earlier this week, but we'll catch you up. The precedence that there is such a concept of busha is based on the case in Mishpatim, which you'll get to in 2 weeks if you stick with the same schedule. That that a person is fighting and a woman
Oh,
defending her husband
we just
is
mentioned that. Yeah.
Sika bimivushav, which literally means
Mm.
she grabs his embarrassing parts, which we understand to mean his testicles. And so the concept of busha is almost always in a reference to something to nakedness and vulnerability and sexuality. It's not limited to that. So just to be clear, a person who spits in someone else's face is also chayav for busha, but that's sort of the archetypical case.
But biblically, that's the nakedness or to do with that is the only kind of biblical case of embarrassment.
Correct.
Where
That
that word is used.
Yeah, I think so.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. It's true. It's very, very interesting. But we're going to stop there. Can we do 7 p.m. tomorrow like we did last week or some version of that?
Please. Definitely for me.
Like, I'm very flexible, so I could do a different time if that's better, but 7 p.m.
Yes, that will work.
Okay, perfect. We're doing
What would be
7
one
p.m., God
question?
willing.
What would be the scenario from the beginning of the daf today? You said if a person is repaired fully and he returns to work, and we discussed that, but during the meantime, you have to pay the nezek or the shevet, so forth. But if the repair produces a rehabilitation such that the individual is better than he was beforehand. Not just that brings him back. You bring that baseball player. They talk about Tommy John surgery. These pitchers are even better than them. Or let's say a person has an artificial limb prosthesis. He can run faster now with that. And now he's even better worker than he was before.
Right. So he should pay you. Yeah. So I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because even the question we started with, that it was temporary, right? One of the opinions, which is not necessarily the way we paskin, is that you have to pay nezek because at that time the person's worth less money, right? And so I think it's very much a case like, right, you can't. It would be the case, just to give you a concrete example, that if you wreck somebody's car, and because you wrecked their car, they didn't get on the plane and the plane crashed, right? You can't say to them, I saved you a lot of money by wrecking your car because you missed your plane and your life was saved, right? So we understand that, right? Meaning you pay for what you did in the moment. And so it's true that the question of how you assess nezek has to be based on a certain time, even if it turns out down the road that this person, stopped the job they were doing and are more valuable. You would pay based on what happened at that time because you can't control, right? You can't say, let's wait 100 years and see what really turned out to happen. So I think in that case, you would pay the nezek. Again, the way you evaluate nezek is what we've been discussing is based on some kind of market value, which is very debatable, right? Some people would look at a person who's damaged and say, oh, they're going to come back stronger, and so their damage is not lower, right? So the market might not value them lower, and then you wouldn't have to pay. But it's all dependent on what you would be at the market at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. I've got to run. Shavua Tov. Hope tomorrow
Shabbat tov.
7 p.m. We will put
Thank
on.
you.
Okay, good night.
Good night.